Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
It's going great. I got to see you yesterday. I got to see a bunch of our friends on the beat yesterday. We got to see our friends from the SID office yesterday. We got to see a bunch of Ohio State football players and coaches yesterday. And today, I'm not standing in the sun for 8 straight hours. How are you?
I am okay. I currently, right now, have a wet towel around my neck, a cold wet towel around my neck because I got my first sunburn of the year yesterday. Your spray tan lotion thing, I did not use enough of, clearly. So yeah, it was not a great night. My arms are red, my legs are red, my face and the back of my neck are charred at this point. So not a great morning and an evening last night, but overall, like you said, it was good to see everybody. I don't know that I need to do it for 7-8 hours on a blacktop without a cloud in the sky next time. Maybe next time a tent, like a party tent, something like that.
Yeah, that wouldn't be too bad. Maybe turn it into a little bit of a tailgate. Some beverages, that would certainly liven up the mood a little bit, for sure.
Although Jerry Emick, OSU SID, did bring us all some water, made a McDonald's run, brought us breakfast, and then 10 minutes later also had lunch for us. So you got your sausage McMuffin, and then like 10 minutes later, he's like, all right, double cheeseburger time. And so that was nice of him. But man, it was a long day. And I'll tell you what, Tom, even though we were basically just in this space of a small parking lot at the Woody in front of the Woody statue, basically. I looked at my watch, and after the end of the day, I had walked like 2.9 miles from basically just pacing, around, like, or rocking back and forth, or just stretching, or doing nothing, but still, getting a whole bunch of steps in. But we did get to see almost everybody. The only people I can't say the only people we didn't see because we might be missing somebody, but the last couple of groups that we were waiting for were the true freshman quarterbacks and the true freshman receivers. And I don't know that we saw any of those guys, but Tom, people should not be worried because
the way Ohio State is doing the intake process, you have to come to Columbus, get a test for COVID, and then you have to wait and sort of be quarantined for 24 to 48 hours until the test results come back and say you're good. So basically, guys who had shown up by, say, last Friday who tested and were negative were able to come in on Monday. Guys who showed up later than that, who maybe just got the test on Sunday night, were not cleared yet to go into the facility. I mean, they're being very strict about this, trying to take every possible precaution. And so, yeah, the fact that we did not see certain players yesterday does not necessarily mean that there's anything wrong or they're transferring or they're sick or anything like that. It's just they haven't gone through the whole process yet to get cleared to go inside this facility.
And we did see Justin Fields, so that was good. He said hi. Everybody was walking in with their masks on. There were times where people couldn't get in because there was still another group. You get to the front door, and then you walk into the lobby where they've got everything in, but only a certain number of players were allowed into the lobby at a time. So sometimes you'd have a big group, a group of 9, I guess, since that would be the largest group of players just waiting to get into the lobby. And, Tom, you ever go to the zoo where you walk into the kangaroo exhibit and there's like 2 sets of doors and you go through the first door and that door has to be closed before you go into the next door because they don't want any of the kangaroos getting out. This is kind of like that, where only 9 kangaroos at a time are allowed in. But yeah, so we had like 9 offensive linemen just chilling outside and waiting to get let in. Tom, we have covered, Rose Bowl, Michigan games, Penn State comebacks, all kinds of crazy stuff. Where would yesterday rank on your list of like most memorable days?
See, here's the thing about the word memorable. The word memorable doesn't have to mean good. It just has to mean something that sort of stands out that you'll remember later. there's lots of days. As we were standing around in the parking lot yesterday, we were sort of all reminiscing about some of the other memorable days that were not necessarily like great days, but they were memorable. All of the hotel check-in days, obviously all very memorable. The day when Ohio State was sorting out, would Urban Meyer be suspended? Would Urban Meyer be fired? What was going to happen with that? When we were standing around in the parking lot and or loading dock across the street from the WAC. That was a very memorable day. Yesterday is definitely a day that will stick out, just standing in a parking lot sort of for basically the extended hotel check-in day. But as I said to you at one point, sort of jokingly and sort of not, we should call the episode about this particular day, So You Want to Be a Sportswriter.
Mm-hmm. Because the other thing is there's nothing to write about. Players are here. I can't turn that into 1,000 words. We didn't get to talk to anybody. Didn't get to talk to any coaches. It's just something it's a photo op. You're there because everybody else is there. And that's also part of the life, the capital T, capital L, the life. But it's not complaining. We're just telling you that this is what we did yesterday. And if you would like to do this, then, I'm sure after about an hour, you'd be like, you know what? I'm going to go back to my old job of being a doctor. I think I'm going to put that schooling to better use than whatever this is. And you would be right to do so. Anything else from yesterday? You know what struck me? Two things, Tom, and I mentioned this in the video that we shot. We got to work before Kerry Combs did. So that is an accomplishment that I never expected, and it is something, maybe that's what will make this my most memorable work day ever, is I was more dedicated to my craft than Kerry Combs was to his.
We got there real early because the first players were arriving at 6:30. So I showed up, 15, 20 minutes before that, figuring maybe they're going to have guys coming in earlier than that. And then the coaches started rolling in, sometime around maybe 7, some of them a little later. At least one came in probably closer to like 10:30. And we officially beat Kerry Combs to the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. Now, I don't think we stopped for coffee 7 times on the way in like he probably did. So that helped our time. But yeah, that was when you can beat the most enthusiastic man in the world into work in the morning like that feels like a real accomplishment.
Mm-hmm. And it was also interesting to me that there are not a lot of people allowed in the building. And we saw evidence of that when Ryan Day had to go and get his own Chipotle for lunch. He left the building and got into his car, and we're like, I wonder where he's going. And then like 10 minutes later, he comes back and he has Chipotle, and it's like, wow, you don't have somebody, there's like no interns. It's like, no, there's nobody else in there. It's coaches and it's players and a couple of support staff maybe. And that's all that's allowed in there. And so, one of the drawbacks of that is the coach has to go get his own lunch. I don't know why you wouldn't just like Grubhub it, but in these uncertain times, you got to keep every penny, I guess. Right, Tom?
Grubhub's not great for restaurants. Grubhub takes a good chunk. I think Ryan Day is just interested in supporting local business. And I guess my analogy, my theory falls apart with the fact that Chipotle is not exactly local business, but the local franchisee, just want to support the local economy without having Grubhub take a chunk out of it. I'm sure that was what the decision was based on.
And then you've got a bunch of sports writers standing around, seeing the bag and analyzing the bag. Is that a bowl? Is that a burrito? It looks like a burrito to me. No. Look at that. It's too wide to be a burrito. And other people are like, look at the bag sag. There's a burrito in the bottom of that. So when you're just standing around at that point, that was 5 hours because that was around noon. You're looking for stuff to talk about. So that was Monday. The players are back. More will be arriving, but essentially the entire team is now back, and based on the results of the latest testing, they should all be getting back to work today or so. So that was Monday. So that was some good news. Maybe some bad news coming, Tom, is 5-star offensive tackle JC Latham trending away from Ohio State, and at this point trending gone from Ohio State, as he seems a commitment to Alabama seems imminent, but also there would still be the thought that he will still visit places. And if one of those places is Ohio State, then maybe these two can fall back in love with each other. Cause, for a while it seemed like it was Ohio State and JC Latham. That's where all of the projections were. And then it stopped being that way. And I know Alex Gleitman has something on BuckeyeScoop.com today about that and how all of that happened. So go check that out. But Tom, this is a pretty big blow for what used to be a decent recruiting class for the Buckeyes.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's still a decent recruiting class for the Buckeyes as the number one class overall and still potentially on track to be the greatest of all time. It's at least decent, I would say. But for sure, it is a blow. That's tackle is a spot where you really can't miss at tackle. You need to, when you have a chance to add a 5-star tackle, you should do it. It is very much tackle and defensive end and defensive tackle. Those are spots where if you miss for a few years in a row, that really will catch up to you. Now, Ohio State has not missed a few years in a row. They landed Paris Johnson last year. So they're not in bad shape at offensive tackle, but they want to make sure they've got to find someone to be a bookend there on the other end of the line, because they've got Donovan Jackson, who's a 5-star prospect, but he sort of projects inside as a guard. So they will definitely need to add a tackle somewhere. I had Alex on the Morning Scoop, which is our daily podcast on Tuesday morning, to talk a little bit more about that. You can find the Morning Scoop on Apple Podcast. Just search Buckeye Scoop and you'll find it, or Morning Scoop Buckeyes, anything like that. You'll find it. I would encourage you to subscribe to that show. But yeah, Alex shared some insight into maybe what could have changed. It sounds like one of his parents is more supportive of Ohio State than the other, and they're divorced, and he's now living with the parent who is not as supportive of Ohio State as the other one. So that's it can come down to just stuff like that, which is maybe outside of the controls of the Ohio State coaching staff to some degree. But if he really does take visits this fall, then it's never over. Ohio State does a great job with recruiting visits, getting guys on campus and really showcasing the school well. So if they can get JC Latham back on campus this fall, definitely don't rule Ohio State out.
It will be interesting to see if they go ahead and move on, because they have to have a plan B, and not necessarily move on, but give another guy a whole bunch of attention, knowing that we're still going to come back around and try to get JC Latham on campus. And I know like Rayshawn Benny out of Michigan, Oak Park, Michigan, has been a name that is being talked about. And I looking at the message board and how in Twitter talking about Rayshawn Benny like it'd be this huge drop off and this devastating thing. And I'm like, let me punch him up here on 24/7 and see how terrible he is. And he's a 4-star guy, top 200 guy, number 194 overall, number 20 offensive tackle in the nation, with offers from Iowa, Michigan, Auburn, Florida State, Georgia. So, LSU, and some of those SEC offers are more like, hey, come to camp and see what you can do. But Ohio State has signed many, many guys like this over the years, and they've turned out pretty okay. But yeah, to go from JC Latham to anybody else is going to be a blow when you're talking about winning the recruiting rankings, getting the best players you can. But it seems like Ohio State, they lose a 5-star tackle, they get one, they lose one, they get one, and right now it's their time to lose one, and then maybe next year they can get one. You go with like Jackson Carman, they didn't get him. They got Nicholas Petit-Frere, then they lose out on somebody else at this point that I'm forgetting, and they end up with Paris Johnson. And so, you don't get everybody you want, but maybe they can get back into Latham and get that situation straightened out. But I think as long as they end up with the Washington kids and the rest of the people that the rest of the targets that they're interested in, you can't assume you're going to get everybody, especially when visits aren't allowed, and there's it's just an odd time. So things are going to get a little hinky, and I think that's pretty much, as you explained, what happened here. Anything else on the recruiting front, Tom? The Latham thing?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. But yeah, I would encourage you to listen to the Morning Scoop show from Tuesday morning. I think that Alex did a pretty good job breaking that down, and also shared a story about a top 100 player out of New Jersey whose high school coach has basically a two-decade relationship with Ryan Day that I don't think anyone else knew about. I think Alex was the first person to report on that. That was a pretty interesting story. You can read that on BuckeyeScoop.com. And also you can listen to the podcast, the Morning Scoop podcast from Tuesday to hear that story.
Now, is that a 2-decade relationship where they're like mortal enemies?
It seemed more positive than anything else. They've just known each other for a while.
All right. Because I mean, I know I've known some people for 2 decades that I cannot stand. So that wouldn't necessarily, be a positive thing, but this sounds like an okay thing. So that's good. Tom, let's move on to Michigan offensive line commit Tristan Bounds, a 3-star prospect out of Connecticut, who in the past week was on a Michigan Rivals podcast and mentioned that he wants to kick the bleep out of Ohio State. Now, I did not listen to the podcast because clearly even the people doing the podcast promoted this and put that quote on their Twitter. So this is really what they want us to talk about. First of all, I get that we're all in the business of clicks and subscribers. I kind of feel like they did the kid a disservice here by putting this out because, Tom, there's a history of this, and it rarely goes well for the Michigan recruit who is talking trash like this. But he said it, so yeah, go ahead and put it out there. But it's such there's no backing to it. It's thin. Where there's you have no say in this game at all right now, and what you're saying stuff right now that guys this year may have to pay for. And that's, I'm sure there are Michigan players like right now, like, who are you? And why are you saying anything about this game like that? Or maybe they're like, yeah, I said the same thing when I was in high school.
Yeah, it's not a great idea. We have talked about this a few times in different contexts, but the decision-making process of, late teen to early 20s-year-old males is not always spotless. And this is probably a good example of that, where you can say if you say the quiet part loud, generally nothing good happens. And there's a little bit of a history there of this for Michigan. I mean, as soon as someone says Michigan recruit speaking ill of Ohio State and then things not going well, everyone's mind, I'm sure, immediately goes to Kyle Kalis with the blood on the field, and I believe the Michigan-Ohio border is now open. He was a 5-star player from Cleveland who went to Michigan and then went 0-5 against Ohio State. Logan Tilley-Tillman and Devin Gardner both burning Ohio State recruiting letters. Logan Tilley-Tillman actually posted a photo of the Ohio State recruiting letter on fire and then went to Michigan, did not beat Ohio State, and then left Michigan. Devin Gardner didn't beat Ohio State. 2 years ago, Joey Velasquez was an Ohio State baseball recruit who then went to Michigan for football and said, I don't think anybody's going to be getting any gold pants anytime soon, and then immediately lost the first game 56-27 at home. So, there's a history of guys saying this and it not ending up real well. And I think part of that, part of it's on the kids, obviously, because you should probably know better, but part of it's also on the culture of the Michigan program, where I think this is happening frequently enough that you don't see Ohio State players talking about Michigan this way. You don't hear Ohio State players saying they're coming to Ohio State to kick the bleep out of Michigan. They say they come to play in that game or to be a part of that rivalry. That was always one of Urban Meyer's big things is, how do you respect the rivalry, work it every day, but respect it rather than, just kind of trash talk it. And I think when Michigan fans probably look at Michigan State players saying that kind of stuff about Michigan, they kind of roll their eyes, and it's probably realistic for Ohio State fans to kind of roll their eyes too. But you're poking the bear, and I loved Kyle McCord's response to this. Kyle McCord, the 2021 Ohio State quarterback commit, just all he wrote was, "Should not have said that." I was like, "Yep, that's great. That was 5 words that communicated a whole lot more than 5 words." Ohio State doesn't generally need any help getting fired up for the Michigan game, but on the off chance that Ohio State at some point kind of gets bored with beating Michigan by 3 touchdowns every year, like, you don't need to give them anything else to think about to be focused on that game, keep the focus on that game. Because if Ohio State has better talent and Ohio State maintains the focus on that game the way they have, there are not very many paths to victory for Michigan there. And, that ultimately, I think, ends up helping Ohio State if Michigan players are going, "Oh, yeah? Well, guess what?" That ultimately doesn't serve their best interests, I don't think.
Yeah, because when I see what he says, and I see you talk about the other guys and what they've said, I immediately think back to Urban Meyer talking about respecting the rivalry, and Ryan Day respects the rivalry, and the players they recruit respect the rivalry. Now, they may pop off here and there, but then they'll quickly be told, hey, that you're not playing in the game, don't talk about it. And so when you see Michigan recruits saying stuff like that, it feels like that's also their attitude when they get to Michigan. They think it's just a game you go in. It's just another game that you go play, and the possibilities are there for a win. And I wrote about this in Michigan Monday on Monday. Like, Michigan one day, Michigan will win this game. But when you say, like, eventually Michigan's going to win it, eventually is a thing that never gets here. Eventually is always on the horizon. And Ohio State is constantly working to keep eventually even further away. So they're working every day to make sure that, yes, they know one day they're going to lose, but they're doing everything to make sure it's not this day, and doing everything they can to make sure it's not tomorrow. And then you see these kids are just like, I can't wait to go up there and beat Ohio State. And it's like, well, that's the end goal. There's so many things like before that. They should be saying, I can't wait to get up there and learn about the rivalry and understand why maybe we're not doing what we should be, and why Ohio State is as successful as they have been. What maybe Tristan Bounds should say is like, I can't wait to get up there and help Don Brown coach the defense against the Buckeyes. Because right now, what Don Brown is doing is, Ohio State scoring 59 points a game against Michigan. So maybe instead of saying, I can't wait to go beat them, maybe think about, I can't wait to get up there and maybe devise a better plan, rather than just thinking it's bound to happen sometime. And so maybe me just throwing this out there, maybe this will be the time. You're throwing darts on a board that is very far away from you. And so then your accuracy is gone. And this is a thing that you have no experience with, other than I'm a Michigan recruit now. So I can, I guess, have this air of overconfidence that doesn't have a lot of bearing in reality. And then when you are so, again, I'll say it's like a paper thin thing where there's no structure. And then once you get into Michigan, that lack of structure continues, and then you just get blown over by the rivalry itself. And you become this bitter person who, when you finally make it to Michigan, to Monday Night Football or Sunday Night Football, and you say your school's name, you talk about your high school instead of your university.
And it's bizarre that Michigan's coaching staff hasn't said to all of these guys, like, just, you can think it, we can talk about it a certain way. This is not the productive way to talk about that. Like, this is partly, I feel like, on the Michigan program to some degree too, because it keeps happening. And it's not happening a ton, but it's happening often enough that if the culture around the Michigan program was respect the rivalry, respect the opponent in the same way that it seems to be around the Ohio State program, then you wouldn't think this would keep happening. But it does seem like there's a little bit of a, I don't know if desperation is the right word, but just we have to do this. They know they have to beat Ohio State at some point, or they're never going to get to where they want to get to. And, Harbaugh's been there 5 years now, and it still hasn't happened for him. So I think there's probably a little bit of desperation sinking in with him. And it seems just kind of counterproductive. And I know the temptation for everyone on Twitter is to like go and quote tweet it and dunk on the kid. And there's also an argument to be made for, sometimes when you're 17, you say and do dumb things. And I am eternally grateful that Twitter was not a thing when I was 17. But, there is probably something to be said for just sort of understanding, like, yeah, these are high school kids. And when you were a high school kid, you probably said and did dumb things like this. And, don't necessarily make this the one lasting legacy of this kid's life. Some, one sentence he said on a podcast when he was, 17, 18 years old. But, also that's sort of on the Michigan program for not communicating to these kids, hey, don't say something stupid because you don't want to end up as Kyle Kalis or, any of these other guys who we've talked about, Logan Tully-Tillman. Like, you don't want to be that guy where you're something of a punchline when people look at you 10 years later.
And that's, you talk to most Ohio State fans who followed the recruiting of Kyle Kalis, and you can't say his name without somebody chiming in with blood on the field, so I think you could have done the kid a better service by leaving those quotes out. But again, I'll also put it on the Michigan coaches like you. Ohio State, when they're talking to recruits, playing against Michigan, playing in this rivalry is a recruiting pitch. And when you're talking about it, you're discussing it with reverence. You're not saying, we beat these dudes all the time. It is so fun. It is so easy. Come to Columbus. Let's whoop on these dudes. That's not the message. They're talking about it's the greatest rivalry in all of sports, and it's a privilege to play in it. And you better bring everything you've got. We're going to fight for this every day to get this win. And conversely, I don't know how much of a recruiting pitch it is at Michigan. There would be ways to couch it where you could, hey, come to Michigan. Let's be the class that starts turning things around against Ohio State. But I don't think coaches like to be reminded of their failings as a recruiting pitch, and I don't know how wise it would be anyway. So if you're not addressing the elephant in the room with the recruits, then you leave it to the recruits when they're talking to other people to address the elephant without any instruction on ixnay on the elephant. Hey, don't say anything bad about the elephant. And if they're not getting that from the coaches, they're going to be like, this freaking elephant I am going to take this elephant down. And you're like, calm down. But they don't know any better because they're not getting the instruction. They're not getting the history lesson. All they're getting is they see the losses and they're thinking, as everybody does, that's not going to happen to me. And it could be with anything. It could be a car accident. It could be COVID. It could be whatever. It's not going to happen to me. And so then they think the same thing about Ohio State. And then they'll tell people who are listening. And the thing is, with this game, there's a lot of people listening. And a lot of people will remember what you said. And it's just, it would be wiser to come at this from the perspective of what Ohio State does in terms of just being respectful of the opportunity, appreciative of the opportunity, rather than looking at it as, I'm going to be the one and this isn't going to happen on my watch. It's like, well, you're one player. Okay. You need everybody on hand to win this game. You are one player from Connecticut. Okay. Let's not forget that, Tom, although that might be, statist, but just you're one guy. Calm down a little, come at it from a more respectful approach. And wait to make your guarantees when you're actually playing in the game and not just suited up, but starting, because we don't need the third string freshman, who's redshirting, guaranteeing victory or talking trash about anybody. Wait till you're actually contributing before you start saying stuff like this. Now you can say, I would love to beat Ohio State when I am at Michigan, and that's what my goal is. Then nobody has an issue. That's not what happened here. And so, again, I guess it would be a little bit of lack of respect for the rivalry. Again.
Well, you mentioned he's from Connecticut. He's also from a pretty hoity-toity prep school in Connecticut, Choate Rosemary Hall, which is, if you have not been there, I have. I grew up in Connecticut, so I actually have been to that school before. And it is like, if you think of, picture a New England prep boarding school in your head, and yep, that's it. I have not been there in, I was only there a few times, and it was 25 years ago, but if you picture people in boat shoes with probably wearing multiple polos with pop collars, you're probably not super far off. A lot of Nantucket Reds, maybe, in that area. It's not someone who probably has grown up living and dying with the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry in Connecticut. And so it really does tell me that may be part of how they're talking about the rivalry within the program or within the recruiting class, that's the mindset. And, that's fine, but you should know better than to say it out loud, because it's just, like I said, it's counterproductive. It's, you're adding fuel to the fire for Ohio State, which really does not need any help with fuel for that particular fire. So, again, short-term decision-making for, 17 to 21-year-old males, not always a strong suit, and this is just another example of that.
Yeah, there's enough tires on that fire in Ann Arbor. You don't need to throw 4 more on there, all right? Just let this tire fire burn out, and maybe eventually this pile will drop down. You don't need to put any more fuel on there. Tom, you got anything else? I think we can go ahead and wrap up.
Nope, I think we are good for today.
All right. Thank you all for listening. Make sure to check out Buckeye Scoop. There is gobs and gobs of stuff, and we've got more podcasts coming. Sloopcast guys have come over. The Silver Bullets guys will be coming over closer to the season. Gives in the Bank is now on iTunes. That's Bill Green and Mark Givler's podcast talking about recruiting. They're going to start a new one this Friday. In the gambling realm. And so check that one out. Morning Scoop is now on iTunes as well, as Tom said. So go ahead and subscribe to that one also, and continue to listen to this one. But go check out BuckeyeScoop.com, sign up, look around, and I promise you like what you see, because there's a bunch there to read, and the message board is awesome. A bunch of videos. And as you know, a bunch of podcasts. So thank you all for listening, and we will talk to you later.
We could steal a car and leave tonight. Midnight, porch light. I had to see you 'cause I know things just haven't been right. This feeling's getting stronger. I can't take it any longer. Say you will, now say you will. Oh yeah, say you will. good